Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus A330 pilot, and with me today is Pablo, Airbus A350 captain and Inibuilds test pilot. Hi Pablo.
Hello, Emmanuel. Thanks for having me here.
I'm absolutely delighted to have you here today. So let's give the audience a little overview into why we're talking today and into what we want to talk about today. So I promised you guys out there that whenever I find some issues with the 350 or with any other add-on that I'm flying, I'm always providing feedback to the developers. And Inibuilds has been very, very open for that feedback, and ultimately they set up a group with many developers in there whom I've had phone calls with, whom I'm sending my bug reports directly to so that we can work on them directly. And ultimately Pablo was added to that group as well, so that if there is anything where I may not be 100% sure about, remember, even though I'm technically speaking type rated on the A350, I do actively fly the A330, and though I did spend some time with an A350 instructor to familiarize myself, that's not the same as flying the actual aircraft. So Pablo and me actually spent a little while chatting as well, and we thought there's so many interesting topics that we are talking about here, we should really share those with the community, and that's how the entire idea of today's video came up. So I know that many of you are hoping for some controversy today, but I'm afraid I kind of have to tell you that the only controversy we're going to start today is this one. Pablo, is it Boeing or Airbus?
Of course, you have to start like that, huh? There's no other ways.
Oh, absolutely,
I
there
feel we have
isn't.
two Airbus pilots chatting about it. What way do you think this is gonna go?
Oh, that's the 747 for sure.
Always, because back then in the 747 days. Oh, well, from my side, what can I say? With the view that you have over there with the 350, I love my good old Airbus. I think it's a beautiful aircraft. But that being said, my experience with actual Boeing aircraft is only in flight sim. I have not been lucky enough to fly any Boeing aircraft in real life. I've always been on the Airbus side.
All right, so you've always been condemned to that side then. Well, I did fly the 737,
Yeah.
and I have to say I'm so happy that I'm on Airbus nowadays. It's so much more ergonomical. You've got space everywhere. Of course you have that famous table. I mean, which Airbus pilot is not going to mention it? Even though I'm wondering, looking at this table over here, how do you manage not to throw that tray table off the table over here?
How do we manage not to what? Sorry?
Not to knock your tray with all your food off that table, because it doesn't have those barriers at the side like the
Ah,
A330
I
does.
see what you mean. No, I'm glad it doesn't have the barriers that you have on the 330 because it gives you some more flexibility with it. Sometimes with the little barriers on the 330, you can only, you have to rotate it 90 degrees so it fits over there. Yeah, this I find no issues, and it's got also those little friction pads, the kind of not triangular ones, but the whitish ones that you see on the left over there on that corner. That's a little kind of friction pad, so that also helps hold the tray.
Ah, I suppose that's a good idea. You do fly the A330 as well, do you?
Yes, 330 and the 350 at the same time.
Oh, lovely. Which of the two do you prefer?
Oh, I love the two of them. To be honest, I really like the two aircraft. Each one has got the things that make it special, but I love both. I don't say I love one more than the other. Each one has got things like the handling on them is different, the systems are different. The operation itself is very similar, being two Airbus aircraft, but I love both. The 350, though, it being so modern and it's just also beautiful. Such a beautiful aircraft to look at it. When doing the walk around, I often stop and just look at it and say, this is stunning.
That feels so familiar. Unfortunately, I haven't been lucky enough to fly the 350 yet, but when I transitioned from the 737 to the 330, it's better in any way. That's what I can confidently say after almost 2 years on the A330 now. All right, so obviously we are not just sitting here today to chit-chat all around, even though there were a couple of very interesting topics that came up when we talked last time, and before I even noticed, over an hour was over. But let's actually talk a little bit about some of the things that people do say about the Inibuilds Airbus, and let's try to think about why some people may say that, and how the points of views from pilots and flight simmers do tend to differ from time to time. In so many of my videos, I get comments like, this airplane is unflyable, and then I'm sitting here, I'm flying it from A to B, I'm really enjoying it. But some flight simmers do seem to have some issues. What's your experience there?
From my side, I as well haven't experienced any major issues when it comes to completing flights, and that's why, of course, it was released. We have quite a big internal team testing, just short of 100 people, actually, I think we are now. And everyone was, of course, completing flights of all different lengths, polar, non-polar, oceanic, you name it. And because, of course, we were all managing to complete it, that was our experience. And I still actively use it all the time and test it as well. And I also find that I can complete the flights normally, following our normal procedures.
That's exactly my opinion as well. Now, when we talk about exactly what your experience with the A350, with a simulated one, is, maybe we should quickly talk about what exactly you do over at Inibuilds. So could you just give us a quick summary of what they pay you to do?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I am part of the quality assurance team, so testing as well. So I do the internal testing whenever we have any of our versions coming out. We, of course, test it internally. It's quite a large group of us doing this. And also being an actual active A350 pilot, I'm also a technical advisor as well. So when there are issues pertaining the aircraft or technical doubts or further information being required, I'm also a point of contact for them in that sense.
Excellent. So that actually sounds very, very similar to what I do over at PMDG, just that I should probably start asking them for actual money instead of just volunteering to do it. No, just joking, of course. I do it because I love to do it, and just because, and I think that's the very same with you. I think both of us just do it because we want to achieve the best possible for the flight sim community and just to get the best possible add-on, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, I'm sure the same for you. We both started with flight sim as flight simmers. It's not something that we joined afterwards. For me, I started simming when I was 10 or so, and I've been doing it my whole life. And it's been my passion, a hobby, my main hobby, really. And then eventually, of course, everything went to actual real flying. And I still do it because I love it. So now I find myself in a very privileged situation that I always wanted to be, being able to give back to the community. Being part of a team working on Flight Simulator was always one of my dreams, and now I'm finally doing that. But yeah, I'm doing this because I love it, not because, I don't know, I was flying and then someone contacted me and said like, hey, there is this thing called Flight Simulator. Are you interested in helping this? I'm like, oh, what is that? No, that's not the case at all.
Yeah, pretty similar to my story as well. I started flight simming at about that age as well. Been doing it ever since. Eventually I thought like, well, now that I'm finally becoming a pilot, I'm finally getting rid of that computer and rid of, sitting in front of that computer for so much time. And then it turned out I started a YouTube channel and I'm doing just as much of it now. So, yeah.
Oh, yes. That never stops.
Yeah, it's hard to get rid of it, even if you eventually might want to.
Yeah, I also know people that when they say like, why do you still sim? You're now flying the real thing. I'm like, but there's so much more to it. I can fly to places that I'll never fly myself. I can fly so many different aircraft of other eras. I also love flying classics and older aircraft and do very, geeky, nerdy stuff like celestial navigation. Oh, I love all of that. Nothing like crossing the Pacific, only relying on astro navigation. So that I can do nowadays in real life.
Exactly. Honestly, it's pretty much exactly the same with me. When the PMDG DC-6 came out for MSFS back in the day, it was basically like the first aircraft or the first proper simulation of an aircraft in that sim. So I took it for a world tour without GPS. Now, that was before I started the channel. Perhaps I should show you guys a leg or something. But if you're interested, do put it in the comments below, by the way. But yeah, ultimately, you can do so much more in the sim here. I find it funny when I go to the recurrent sim and the colleagues tell me like, oh, so we've flown the Kamasi approach into JFK today. You should really do that. It's an awesome approach. Here, have a look at the charts. And I'm like, oh yeah, I did that 10 times in the sim.
Exactly.
All right, so getting back to the topic then. So you're sort of technical advisor to Inibuilds. So what kind of inputs do you give them, and how do the developers handle that feedback?
The feedback is on all different aspects. So there's of course the technical side when it comes to systems themselves. And then there's also the handling, the visual aspect, and so on. But I think that the main thing that we bring in, and I'm sure you find the same from your side, is as pilots, we bring in how does this feel? Do I feel that I am in there? Do I feel that this is all working like it would in real life? So yes, we might not have like the eye of, is this exactly on the right spot, this little screw, or is it a millimeter high or low? Because I mean, I don't fly with a ruler in my pocket and go and measure that. So there's a lot of like, right now, as you have now in the sim, this view, does this feel right or not? And for example, there was a lot of tuning when it came to the seating position, that it was positioned somewhere, but I immediately, as soon as I opened up the sim, I was like, okay, now we need to change this because it just does not line up right with what I see when I'm on the seat. And then we fine tune those things. So now I can say like, yes, now it feels right. I feel that I'm there in the seat. So there's a lot of different type of inputs that we provide, and they're really good at handling that because of course we are the most critical people inside the company. We have the list of items that have to be checked and confirmed, and then we either say, okay, this is fine, we approve it, it's great, or no, unfortunately, this is still not there yet, and we provide the reason and why it's not working as expected, and then it goes back to the drawing board and it gets fixed, hopefully for the next iteration, and so on.
I think you said something very, very important there. You said that you are trying to capture that feeling of the aircraft. And that's something that I noticed a lot during my testing as well. The developers have, of course, all studied the FCOMs. They've also studied technical material that detailed how things should go and all that stuff. And they all built their aircraft around that. But the one thing that cannot be documented is the feeling for an aircraft. And I think that's the most important thing, why you need pilots on a team in order to be able to get an aircraft right, to give it that feeling. Funnily enough, you also mentioned that you don't fly along with a ruler. Now, a lot of people out there on the internet say that the windows on the simulated A350 are much too big and that they should be smaller. So what's your take on that? How do you think the general geometry of the flight deck looks?
I hadn't heard that one before. Which windows are we talking about? The front ones, side ones in particular, or all in general?
It really depends on which of the complaining people you ask. Some will say those, others will say those. I think what we can certainly say is that the front windows do appear pretty large. I mean, they appear larger than the screens down here, and the side windows, of course, are massive here as well.
Yeah, huge. Well, the thing is, well, yeah, This is exactly what we were talking about earlier. Okay, the windows are indeed huge. So when I'm sitting here, like if you keep looking like that with that angle, that side window is indeed massive. So it comes down really low, and it is a really large window. They all are. And again, it's one of those things that, yeah, maybe if I go out with a measuring tape and I measure it and so on, there could be a difference of something. But when I look at it now with my eye like this, and I'm not the kind of guy that would go and find a photo and online and try to overlay it and so on. To me, it's like, does this look right or not? Because some things throughout the development do immediately, like they jump to us as pilots. They're immediately like, whoa, that caught my eye. Why is that there? Or is that supposed to be there or not? But to me, the windows, honestly, do not jump out at me as being off in their size.
Oh yeah, that feels
I'm
so
not saying
familiar.
they are not exactly down to the millimeter, but as an experience point of view, I don't get the impression, at least on a flat screen, let's say, that they are too large.
On a flat screen, that's really important there, guys, because the A350 cockpit is huge, isn't it? Like in the A330, when you're sitting here looking down to the side, you've got the stick, and then basically your EFB is on top of the tiller already. So you fly both. Tell us, the A330 or 320 in that respect as well, cockpits are quite different from the A350. So could that have an influence on why people feel different about the flight decks in those aircraft?
Yeah, and I also think that the curved, the whole cockpit, as you say, this whole side over here by the window, and this whole combing is very curved and very wide. The 330, like right now, you would already be, on the window pane, really. And it's all very straight edges and very square on the 330. So, well, and here it feels very spacious. So, and the thing is, it is a massive cockpit. When people sometimes look at it, or the first time that we have people getting a 350 themselves, they're like, wow, it's huge. Especially when they used to fly 320s or other aircraft, they get in and they say, wow, it's a lot of space in here.
I had that very same thought when I stepped into the A330 for the first time, but from the 330 to the 350, it has to be the same thing again. They don't call it extra wide body for nothing, huh?
Yeah, no, exactly. And on the sides is where you really notice it. Of course, when you look back as well, you have the extra space when it comes to the other two jump seats over there. But on the sides, that if you stop on that angle right there, like this whole place where you're flying through, that huge gap does not exist on the 330. It's a small little gap. But here on I mean, you can fit a lot in that space. It's very wide.
Oh yeah, it's so interesting. On the 330, we have a rule that we are not allowed to hand any drinks over the center console, so we always have to hand them to the side of the seats. And I tell you honestly, there is not much space left when they're trying to give you a cup of coffee or a cup of tea there, just through that little gap between the seat and the wall. But on the 350, you could put an entire tray over this.
Yes, yeah, I was going to say exactly that. The tray is also the other thing that, for us as well, has to come on the sides. And here on 350, you don't have a problem with it.
Oh yeah. Just an amazing looking cockpit. I really can't wait to eventually fly a 350 in the real world. The sim was excellent already, but there's always the big difference between the sim and the airplane, isn't there?
Yeah, you're going to love it when you get to it. And it's such an amazing aircraft to fly as well. It's a lot of fun. It's so advanced as well, which is the other joy. A lot of people, when they see it for the first time, they're like, wow, it looks cool. Looks like a space shuttle. It's a lot newer than the space shuttle, though.
I suppose that's how those little stars got onto those seats, huh?
Maybe. Maybe there's a connection there.
Yeah, I mean, it does look like something that SpaceX would build eventually, huh?
Yeah, true.
So, when I just said that there is huge differences between the sim and the airplane, then I was not actually talking about the Inibuilds sim I was talking about the actual full flight sim, the one that pilots do their training in, the one that costs more than you and me are gonna earn in our entire lifetime combined. So, on the A330, for instance, the flight controls feel really, really, really laggy in the sim. And sometimes I really have trouble flying the aircraft accurately in the full flight sim, while the real aircraft is a lot more stable and precise. Now, people sometimes complain that the Inibuilds A350 would fly really strange. So, could you give us some input there? Could you tell us how the aircraft is supposed to fly and how the simulated one mimics that?
Well, the aircraft, the real aircraft itself, flies really nicely. It's very, because as I fly a 330 and the 350, I got like the actual, comparison of the two models, because I'll fly one day, and then even the same day, sometimes you could jump onto another pattern and fly the other one. And the 350 is it's very quick, it's very agile, which is very different. And I think that that's also what we received a lot of criticism about, that a plane of this size surely cannot react that quick. But it does, it is very responsive. And the 330, I find that the real one as well does not react at all that way. It's more laggy, you could say. Maybe you can feel more the inertia. At the end of the day, is how the fly-by-wire has been coded for this aircraft. But the 350, you fly it with very small inputs most of the time. Of course, sometimes you have to add bigger ones, but itself, it is a very responsive and fast, agile aircraft.
And do you think that there is like anything in the simulator one that should still need some improvement? For instance, I think that the rotation is something that happens very, very rapidly. Like I pull on the stick and the nose immediately starts to come up. I haven't flown any actual airplane that showed this behavior. They all needed some piece of additional input there. But what do you think? What kind of topics could still use a bit of improvement, and is that already being worked on?
Yes, the rotation, definitely, we are working on that. So we are aware of that, and we were aware. But that is one of those things that, for example, it's really involved how to fix it. And to me, again, that's one of the things that I really learned only when I joined the Inibuilds team. Because before, as a simmer, I always thought, surely these things are quick to fix and easy to fix, and it's just like some variable that you change somewhere, and now suddenly the rotation changes and nothing else does. But that's what I realized, and I'm sure you probably have like a similar experience, that everything has got an effect on something else. So probably doing a quick change that fixes that immediately now could have a lasting effect that then maybe affects your flare later, or that affects your pitch during the cruise. And I don't know exactly how that works, but I know that things take a while, and that it's quite a slow process to get it perfect. So yes, I have noticed that, and we do agree that those instances are there in which the aircraft gets off the ground too easily and at a low pitch angle, especially with like a higher config, like config 2 or 3. But we are working on it, and that's our intention. We want to perfect it, and we are committed, and that's why we're releasing updates all the time. And some of these things, some of them are quicker to fix, others will unfortunately take a bit longer.
And I can tell you directly from my own experience, guys, that Pablo is not just saying some marketing stuff here. That's exactly how it is. Sometimes it's hard for some people to realize, but let me give you another example from my own experience advising a development team. Back in the day when we did the flight model of the PMDG 737, I told them like, hey guys, the pitch on final approach isn't quite correct. And then they're like, yeah, but if we correct that, then the pitch in cruise is going to be several degrees off. So it's one or the other. And ultimately we found a good compromise in between. But that's where simulator limitations come in place. That's where a lot of things are coming together. And these things can really take some time to work on. But tell me, Pablo, do you pilots actually sign off any add-ons before release?
So what happens is we have lists of things like bugs or issues that are consistently being looked at, and then some of them of course have to be solved before delivery because they are major, let's say, and others, there's where we look at all of us as a group. So it's not so much that there's a particular individual and that individual will say like, okay, now this is approved and it goes. It's again, the experience overall is, even though there's an issue with this particular system or situation or flight plan issue, whatever you want to call it, is it occurring enough that people cannot complete their flight, that it will affect the experience adversely? And that is what mostly makes the whole image of like, okay, this is now ready to proceed, and then we can work our way to fix it. Because there's also a lot of what I discovered, like edge cases. Sometimes things just, in very particular situations do not work. And then we have to see like, okay, well, do we want to just stop everything now until we iron that out? Or is this like an edge case that does not occur that often? And when that is the case, we say like, okay, well, the conditions are very particular. So chances are it will not affect a lot of people. So we'll work on it. We will fix it later, but at least people can start enjoying it now.
And I think if you really wanted to fix everything and perfect everything, then we'd probably see, one add-on coming out every 5 years or so. Ultimately, I think most developers, and that most certainly includes the A350 release here, have found very good compromises on the release. Of course, all developers, regardless which group we're talking about, know about issues upon the release of a product, but some hit the sweet spot a little bit better. Others hit it a little bit worse. Personally, I think the A350 actually hit it pretty good, as it was a pretty good experience when it initially came out. We could do the full flight. There were a few things that weren't implemented just yet, but overall we could fly the aircraft by SOP, and I think that's the important point, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And that's also where I find that as real pilots come in and provide that input, because we look at what do we do on a normal flight? What are the things that we look for in the instruments, in the flight plan, in loading our route, in the overall experience? What happens now? What are we supposed to look at? What do we check? And that is also quite a big difference from the system side, because of course there are the FCOMs out there, the manuals, and that is the basis of everything. But we are the ones that when we look at experience, we go like, okay, that immediately jumps out of my eye right now. Why is that not happening? Which, of course, when you look at the whole FCOM, there's so much information, but we are the ones that we sit there right now, we're like, this should have happened at this moment. Why did it not happen? That's what I'm expecting. That's what I need to continue this flight normally. And that is the core essence of what we try to achieve.
When we talked the day before yesterday, and when the entire idea of this video came up, we actually had an interesting case there where you said that some people complained that a landing gear test wouldn't be completed when the gear gets extended. And you and me both kind of said like, well, flight simmers sometimes seem to focus on different things than pilots. So could you tell us, first of all, about that landing gear test, and then why it is really a non-issue for you and me, and certainly for me as well here. So I'm not trying to talk Inibuilds stuff here, but for me it wouldn't be an issue either. And why it wouldn't be an issue for us, but why some flight simmers might be more interested in these kind of things.
Okay, well, the brake pre-landing test, it's so the 350, when you lower the gear, after a few seconds, it will just check that, of course, the braking system is working. Yeah, there you go, as you're zooming on over there. So what happens is this check happens, and then if you happen to be looking at the instrument at the right time, you will just see the pressure coming up all the way, so that both green bars will go up, and then it will disappear. And that is it that you see as a pilot. I mean, of course, it's happening in the background and the systems and so on doing their checks to make sure that, if there's an issue with that brake, then ping, now you would get an ECAM saying that there is an associated problem. But from the pilot point of view, this is not something that we check as such. So it's not like we, for example, with the FCOM and the procedures, everything is very precise. It's not like it says, okay, gear down, observed wheel page, observed pressure coming up, and I don't know, maybe associated with a call, brake pre-landing chest complete. So, because that's not part of a procedure, the way that I see it is, okay, it's important that it happens, of course, for the real aircraft. And also in the simulator, by the way, we are actually adding this. So it's not that we're never adding it. But it's not something that detracts from the actual operation of the aircraft that I would say, oh no, this is an SOP thing that we always check, and now I cannot check it. So this breaks the immersion.
And something I want to add to that is when I'm flying along as a pilot, there are all these kind of things like those tests going on. The 330 is also doing a lot of things in the background there. But from a pilot's perspective, if it was important enough for you to realize it and for you to interact with it, there would be something in the SOP to direct your attention to it. As an example, when you start taxiing and you do the brake check, when you call pressure 0, that's something that they need you to look at. But something like the landing gear test, hey, if that thing fails, the aircraft will direct your attention to it because it will fire an ECAM at you. So it's not important for you as a pilot in that perspective, but for some flight simmers, these kind of things do seem important. My personal theory here is that since many flight simmers have a broad knowledge of a lot of aircraft systems, but don't have that overall big pictures that pilots have, like the operational context of what we are doing, the focus on the things that are currently important. Flight simmers do sometimes seem to specialize their focus on a certain thing without actually having, like the big picture in mind. For example, when lowering that landing gear, when the test is conducted, the thing that I'm looking at is either out here or down here, depending on whether I'm in IMC or in VMC. But it's certainly not over here. Do you see that in a similar way, or do you have like a totally different point of view there?
No, I agree. I think that sometimes it could be disconnect when it comes to the actual system depth and the knowledge and the application of that, and what really matters, as you say, at a particular stage of flight, or the overall flight in general. Because flying is so much more than just the technical side of the aircraft and its systems. It's about how do I complete this flight mission from A to B, taking into consideration all the elements, the weather, the aircraft, the airports, NOTAMs, the whole bigger picture. And the aircraft and its system is a tool to achieve that. And I think that sometimes when it comes to the technical side, people think like everything is used and that absolutely everything is required for everything to work out perfectly. And as you say, like maybe sometimes the bigger picture is missed, like the weather, which is one of the most critical things when it comes to the flight. And that is outside of the technical aspect of the aircraft.
Absolutely. And I think it's really worth mentioning at this point that we are not just trying to say like, oh, flight simmers don't focus on the right things, that's the reason why all of these things are broken. Not at all. But I think it's the reason why there are some people on the internet who say like, oh yeah, these things are unflyable and these are so bad, while I'm sitting here as a pilot saying, well, I like it. I can, follow my SOPs from A to B. The plane responds mostly in the way that it's supposed to. And I'm really enjoying it, while some other people go like, well, this can't be, this can't be, this can't be. For instance, if I have to complain about something, I'm German of course, so I have to. If I have to complain about something, I'm going through here and I see that CMS grayed out. So by now, we can do almost everything we need for an Atlantic crossing. Only the constant Mach number. That's something that's not there just yet. But let's have a quick chat about why this isn't there and why, in general, some things that I find more important may not be there yet, but some things that you, as also a real-life pilot, find more important are there, and in general, why there can be so different point of views from time to time. So why, might system A be simulated, but system B not, and why do two different real-world pilots in their own way say like, yeah, that one is the important system, not the other one. And in case that I'm not talking very clear over here, in case that I'm kind of going in circles, the thing that I want to get to over here is the following. Some people fly this way, others fly the other way. Why is that?
Yeah, and it's an interesting one. I think that, well, the beauty of flight sim is that you can fly it whichever way you want. At the end of the day, it's your own personal joy, and you must enjoy it. So I don't think there's a right or wrong as such, but there are certain things, like, for example, as you say over there, like the CMS, that is not there yet. Is that such a major issue that you cannot complete your flight? No, not yet, because in the real aircraft, you don't actually have to use that particular function. If you now need to maintain a constant speed from what's your next waypoint over there, Leslie, exactly, you can just do that, select the speed, and it will do it. Of course, by using CMS, you can just load it, and it would all happen in managed. But if now ATC were to tell you, from Leslie until Dinham, maintain 8.5, you pull it, and there you're getting it. So, were you able to do it? Yes, you were. So it's not like, ATC asked me for this and I had to say enable.
Yeah, exactly. Perhaps that's a very good point to hang on to transition into differences between how pilots fly their aircraft and how flight simmers fly their aircraft. We did briefly talk about that 2 days ago when we chatted along and came to it. And I think both of us basically agreed that flight simmers tend to want the FMS to do everything. Now, I don't know about your style of flying, because there are lots of different styles of flying out there in the real world, but do you try to make the FMS do everything, or are you more of a selected guy?
Yeah, I think I'm more of like, I don't load too much stuff on the FMS in particular. And again, these are personal views. For example, let's say ETOP scenarios, right? There's so many things that you can set up in, for example, fixed info, right? You could set up range rings for 60 minutes within airports. Further than that, whatever the ETOPS rating is that you are doing, you could draw radials for the runways, lined up with the runways. Yeah, so over there, equidime points and so on. So these things, I personally tend to just keep an eye on the actual timings when they happen, because all of these things, of course, on the flight plans, we know where the times are. And I like also keeping a mental picture by looking, for example, looking, for example, there, the map. So the en route map, there are the numbers, or the en route map, okay, from there, you can already have a very good idea of how far you are from an airport as such. If the situation was like on the edge of it, like if you were in an ETOPS on the very verge of the circle, then yes, there's where it would be helpful to have these things. But for the vast majority of the time, I would rather keep an eye on my flight plan, know the time. Maybe it's a bit of more like an old school way of flying, but each to their own in this sense.
I totally feel you there. For instance, while you talked about adding things through the fix page, I pointed to, oh yeah, I do it all the time. Now, in my airline, it's actually SOP to add at least like the entry point, the equal time point, the exit point, and that kind of stuff. But anything beyond that is no longer SOP in my airline. And the simple fact that there is no true and false over here. One airline does it that way, the other airline does it that way. When we talked prior to this recording, we said like both of us would be highly interested in getting our hands on an actual original Airbus FCOM that has no airline amendments in it, just to see how Airbus actually wants things done. So there are a lot of different ways to do these things, and anything that's not exactly in the FCOM, anything that's not 100% prescribed in those procedures, it's up to the pilot. And we do tend to call those different techniques. Like you said, some enter the rings, others enter the points. Some use true north when flying across the North Atlantic, others don't. And all of these things are neither right nor wrong. They're simply different techniques. Now, I think flight simmers follow that I need everything managed technique a lot. Anything needs to go into the FMS, and if the FMS can't do it, then the plane is unflyable. Now, personally, I'm like, okay, so the aircraft wants to do a 360 over Leslie. It starts to go in circles for whatever reason. It's a bug. Not an actual one in the simulated Inibuilds A350, but let's just presume that would happen, that we'd face a bug over there. Now, many people on the internet would start calling that unflyable. What I would do is this. Go up here, DINIM, present position direct to, insert. Oh, look at that, it's flying in nav mode again. It's working. And for me, that issue is solved, while for others, that would totally ruin the flight experience. So I think something that many flight simmers should do is to, of course, report these things to the developers so that they can get fixed, but follow the Airbus golden rules. If automation doesn't do something the way you want it to do, reduce the level of automation.
Exactly. At the end of the day, you have to get to that next waypoint, and if it's not going as expected, you take over. And that doesn't mean necessarily turn everything off and fly manually. In some occasions, you might need to do that. You are flying the aircraft at the end of the day. So I also agree. If something, and that to me, for example, that would be a deal breaker. If that orbit that you say just appears over there, and I just cannot do direct to DINIM, and that orbit keeps on drawing over and over, okay, now my flight cannot continue. That is a massive problem. But I did direct to, okay, everything went back to normal. I can continue. We'll log that. We'll look into it, but it's not something that I had to shut down the computer and start over.
Absolutely. And this is, I think, the main lesson that any flight simmer should learn whenever watching any real pilot do their stuff on, be it just planes videos, be it YouTube channels here, or be it any developers manuals.
Yeah, exactly. That is what we want at the end of the day, be able to fly and complete our flight.
Absolutely. Ultimately, that's all that it is about. When I'm sitting in an airplane, I always think like, anything that's going on down here is nice, but not important. What I'm seeing out here, that's important. Where is my airplane going? That's real life stuff, of course. In the simulation, of course, I want everything to work, so don't get me wrong over here. But in the real world, if I look out here and the plane is moving along the trajectory I want it to move along, I'm happy, regardless how I accomplished that.
Spot on.
All right. So, I think we really talked about a lot of different things in today's video, and it starts dragging along a little bit. We are at 44 minutes into it right now. So, Pablo, tell us, if there is one thing about the Inibuilds A350 that you want improved, what is that?
That I want improved. Well, the rotation one, I think it's a big one that I want to be solved. And that one, to me, I think it's the main one. And then otherwise, other than that, I would say that yes, we have some minor ones here and there that we are ironing out. But on the top of my head right now, I can say there's something else that really jumps at me that I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that is a big one that we've been carrying on for a while. I don't know if you have any other input. Can refresh my memory on something that maybe I'm missing completely. But from, for example, the handling side, that is the main one. And then, of course, we have identified a few when it came to a particular type of approaches in some places. But that, again, comes with the possibility that there are other approaches available at airports. So, again, it doesn't destroy the flight because, well, you can do one of the other ones and still get the plane on the ground. And if it's not performing as expected, you take over.
Absolutely, and I do have to apologize here. I did not brief Pablo that this question would come. I was literally just asking this into the blue, guys. So this is actually the honest answer from an A350 rated captain. And I have to agree. I actually can't think about anything major that I would like to see improved here. Lots of minor things. I think Inibuilds has a list from myself that's over 100 items long, some of which have of course been fixed in the meantime, others are still open, but I am providing feedback on an almost daily basis, and I have to say that a lot of the things are getting fixed. So that's very, very nice to see, and I think Pablo is doing an amazing job advising Inibuilds on the aircraft, and I really think it is a pretty good aircraft. Of course, it's not study level in the sense that PMDG or Phoenix have their aircraft, but let's ask ourselves, how many of those features did we actually use on those planes that we paid for? And now think about, over here you have an A350, a 5th generation jet. And if we would simulate everything to that same extent, Pablo, what do you think? How many systems would be there that nobody would ever see? Millions?
Oh, yeah. There would be so much. And also, that's another thing. It's a nice thing you touched on that because it takes time to do all of this as well. And that's also the other big factor. Everything can be done in life in general, but it's just about how long do we want to wait for this? Do we want to take more years and then get every single little detail sorted before release? Well, some people, of course, would want it that way. Others, maybe not. So we're in a maybe like in between place because we're still working on it. It's not that it was released, done deal, this is what you get, and that's it. And that now we're suddenly like, oh, because people are mentioning things, we are now really hard at work adding. No, we got to a point where we're hoping and we think that the majority of the people are having fun with it. And then at the same time, on the side, we keep on adding and fixing these things.
And I think you're on a really good track there. The last couple of weeks have been really amazing, adding a lot of things already, and we have a time map that goes well into summer for future updates, so I think it gives us a good picture of what the A350 is going to look like at the end, and I'm really looking forward to it. Of course, this is a 5th generation aircraft. You can't compare your F-14 737 to that 5th generation plane, and if you do take it up, then be sure to remember you got to fly like Maverick to beat a 5th generation plane there with your old 737. But in general, the A350 is such a complex aircraft that simulating it to the same extent that we see on the highest end study level is, in my opinion, not only not necessary, but only driving up the price without adding real benefits to it for many people. And I think that's the philosophy behind the product, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day as well, the longer it takes, then there's also a cost associated with it. Someone has to work on all of these, someone has to make it all happen. And that also means that people would end up having to pay a hell of a lot more for a product to have absolutely everything on day one and wait as well. And by then also there's other implications. In 2 years from now, who knows, there'll be another new simulator coming out. And then by then, everything you've done, back to the drawing board, because it's going to be a new SDK and everything, and maybe it doesn't port over to the next one. And now you've just spent 4 years developing something and you have to start clean from the beginning. That's also an important thing. Aircraft in real life, as we all know, they're done and then they keep on getting updated. But the core world in which we fly in real life does not change every 2 to 4 years with a new world coming out in which is new variables. So that's why, the DC-3 keeps on flying like it did when it first came out.
Scientology is probably going to disagree, but let's not get into that. Alrighty, so Pablo, thank you so much for being here today, and I think this was a great chat flying along, and we've already made it 2 hours into our flight from Munich to New York over here. So if any of you guys are wondering what pilots are doing in flight, well, this is basically it. Talking about, anything and everything, and just spending a good time with one another. At this point, by the way, I find it really amazing, regardless of which pilot I talk to that's also in the flight sim, you always get along so well. So thank you so much for being here, Pablo. I do hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did.
It was an absolute pleasure chatting, Emmanuel. Thank you so much.
So guys, if you have any questions or if you have any ideas, if you want Pablo and me to maybe do some future videos again, be sure to put it into the comments below. In the meantime, as always, be sure to like the video if you did indeed like it. Comment with your thoughts. Without your opinions, we can never improve. And last but not least, subscribe if you're up for more. If you really love what I'm doing on this channel, would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. As always, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and then I see you all again on the next one.